Hey, good morning, all. Welcome to the daily Vote Common Good podcast. It's Tuesday, April 13th, which means that it's Politics Day because we said Tuesday around here. And I'm Doug Padgett in Minneapolis, standing up today, wearing my love shirt, which is the shirt that I wear for public engagements and protests. And our city, our country, our world needs a little more love. And some of you know what's going on in the city of Minneapolis and the suburb just north of Minneapolis called Brooklyn Center. I was up there last night at a family vigil because Dante Wright was shot and killed by a police officer on Sunday. We carry a lot of heavy weight with that, and we will be talking about that issue, the Derek Chauvin murders, the murder, the other police brutality actions that have become part of our public consciousness in coming days. I just want you to know that we're very aware of this and think about it a lot, and we'll be doing all that we can to talk about it. But today's Politics Day, and we're going to be joined by Katie Porter. She is a representative out of the 45th Congressional District in California, one of our favorites. And speaking of favorites, joined by our favorite hoot owl from outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas, Robb Ryersey, who has some new glasses and a bow tie outfit on. So, hey, Robb, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop?
You said, hey, I think I got something. Let's go live. And clearly the thing you thought you had was comparing me to an owl. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm good, Doug. I'm good. Sporting some new glasses. And I warned you, because these glasses are a bit of a departure. I warned you in a text last night, and you said, well, you should wear a bow tie too. So
yeah, because you have long been a bow tie guy.
I am a bow tie guy.
Have gone away from it, at least on the podcast. So it's good to see it. And look, not just an owl, particularly the owl from my childhood, who did that commercial about how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop.
One,
so,
two,
I have
three.
Yeah. He goes three. Yeah. The professor. Yeah. So the professor of political science for the common good, Robb Ryersey. Good to see you, friend.
Good to see you too. I'm excited to share this conversation with everybody because Katie Porter has become, one of the absolute stars of the 2018 blue wave election. From her famous whiteboard and making congressional committee witnesses squirm, to her being the only member of Congress to dress up for Halloween. Do you remember that? Yes. I mean, she's just
like Batgirl.
She was like in a Batgirl outfit, which is amazing. To like photos of her surfing, and I mean, she's just the best. She's a single mom who is working in Congress, who is known for being a serious and engaged and substantive member of Congress, and at the same time being kind of just like all the rest of us. We often talk about what it would be like to send everyday people to Congress, and I feel like Katie is one of the best examples of sending an everyday person to Congress and the difference it can make. I just adore her.
I am with you. She's a good friend to a lot of people and has been a good friend to our effort at Vote Common Good. So if you're thinking we're keeping her in the waiting room, we are not. We recorded this interview with her last week. She has a schedule that needed to be accommodated, and which we were glad to do. So here is our interview. Now, I will say that Katie, I can't remember if this stays in the recorded video, but she also told us she doesn't have a laptop. So she uses her iPad for all of these things. And so her iPad is turned sideways, which is why you'll see the video the way that it is. But it's just all part of the charm and the unbelievable competency and the gravitas that is the representative from the 45th District of California.
Yeah, Doug, do you remember when we were in Katie's office and I don't know, a couple of years ago, and she told us that she gave the government issued computer that she was given as a member of Congress, she gave to one of her staffers because she's like, no, I'm just going to use my iPad.
She is committed to minimalism, and
Yep.
she will not charge another battery if she doesn't need to. So here it is, our interview with Katie Porter. Rob and I will be back for some live conversation about what's happening in the political scenes between last Thursday and today. But for your betterment and enjoyment, our conversation with Representative Katie Porter. All right. Hello, Katie Porter. Good to see you again. It has been so fun to watch your professional life and from your candidacy back in 2018 when we had the privilege of meeting to seeing how you have captured the imagination of so many people in this country and have become a real inspiration for a lot of people. So congratulations on winning your last election, but even more so on your care for the people of this country, and especially for people who are in the difficult economic situations that this country is.
That's what the job is all about.
You have this populist like sensibility to you, where I think, and maybe it just comes from your, as I would like to say, your Iowan Midwestern roots, but you just have this real sense of like, hey, we're all in this thing together, and I have a role to play as a congressperson, and people in their other lives have a role to play, and we need to let those roles come together and sort of help each other. That is shockingly refreshing. And I wonder if you feel that sometimes, that it's really shockingly refreshing, and if it should be as refreshing as it feels to a lot of us.
No, it's been a little bit of a surprise to me that people don't, to me, get what is really the most rewarding part of this job, or they don't talk about it. My colleagues don't seem to think about the job the way I do. But I think this is fundamentally a lot like my past job as a professor at a public university, which is that this is a teaching and learning job. My job is to learn, and my role in Congress gives me opportunities to do that, whether it's through hearings, whether it's through briefings, whether it's through access to, the Library of Congress, administration officials, a terrific staff, going into my community, seeing things in my community that may be invisible to others who live here. And then my job, that's the teaching, that's the learning part. And then my job is to teach. It is to have town halls, to answer people's questions. To ask questions in hearings in a way that gives the American people the information they need. And so that teaching and learning part of the job, to me, it's not that different than what I did before. And so I think a lot of when I'm doing something in Congress, I'm always thinking, could the typical person who's just trying to get through the day, who's worried about a relative with cancer, or who's got a kid who just won't ever remember to turn in their crumpled homework, not that I might be referring to any kid in particular, is this speech, is this hearing, is this little bit going to be able to get their attention, and they're going to be able to understand it and digest it and understand what our democracy needs next from them. And so I just think politics, we are really just avatars of the people in some ways. And so our goal should be continually thinking about how we amplify and empower and engage people. That is the job of a representative.
Yeah, that's the job title, that's the actual name of the job, is to be a representative. And so it's so refreshing to hear you say that. I'm curious, one of the ways that you've done some of that teaching is, with your whiteboard in committee hearings. And I got to tell you, if C-SPAN had a channel of AOC and Katie Porter committee questions, and that's all it was 24 hours a day, a loop of you and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez asking committee questions, I would never turn it off. I would just never turn it off. And so I'm curious about who came up with the whiteboard? How did this little thing that's become part of your brand come about? What's the story behind the whiteboard?
Yeah, so one of my staffers, we were talking about ideas and questions to ask Jamie Dimon. I think that was the first time I used the whiteboard, and we had this idea to ask him about kind of how workers make ends meet or don't, and to illustrate that even beyond the $725 minimum wage, even if we go past that, a lot of people go hungry in this country and struggle to make ends meet. And so we were going to ask him about this budget. And I think it was one of my staffers who said, we should put it on we could write it out. And I've always loved whiteboards. I use them in the classroom every day. And they're really a tool to help the class follow along, to make sure everybody understands, and then to deal with this really common problem, both in class and in Congress, where you ask this important question, and then either the student or fancy CEO, powerful executive says, could you repeat the question? And in Congress, where you only have 5 minutes for a hearing, when somebody says, can you repeat the question, like all of your time is evaporating to be heard. So the whiteboard is really a way to help people follow along, people in America, as well as to help the witness follow along, and to be able to make the sort of question more plain. And my very favorite whiteboard moment actually is the time that nothing got written on the whiteboard at all. And actually, because so many people ask about it, my favorite whiteboard is this little one, which fits in my purse. It's like a perfect size. And but my favorite whiteboard moment is when I was talking about pharmaceutical pricing with a CEO and explaining that they'd raised the price over and over and over and over again, but the drug hadn't gotten any better. They hadn't done any research. They hadn't improved any of it. They were just charging more. And I explained how much the CEO was making by gouging the American people. And then I said to him, this is your total your total compensation is X, 19 million, 13 million, whatever it was. Tell me why you deserve that money, and I'll write it down.
You did not. That is awesome.
No answer, which I think is a problem. And I think that, being able to answer and justify why you're being paid a lot and why you should get resources that other people create and they shouldn't be shared more broadly, you should be able to answer that question. But my favorite moment was actually the one in which nothing got written at all.
That's terrific. So, Representative Porter, a lot of us who deal with the press or media go through media training, and we're taught to take the question that's being asked and to reframe it in your mind so you can answer a portion of it perhaps, but really say the thing you want to say. This is classic media training 101. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of work. I feel like when people come before Congress and they're called and they come voluntarily, or even if they're subpoenaed, they're doing the same thing, right? They don't feel that their job is to answer you. They feel their job is to say what they want to say. You have 5 minutes as a representative. How does that, does that seem right and fair to you? Unlike when someone's under oath in a court case or something, and they're not allowed to do such things because there's a judge there that says.
I mean, this is a couple things here. One, when they testify before Congress, they are under oath, and they are sworn in, and that is something that I think we ought to display a little more and reveal to the American public, because it often happens and it doesn't really get, it gets captured, but people often don't see it. So you are sworn in as a witness, and that's an important part of it. But I think the other thing is, people are absolutely coached. And one of my favorite articles written about my staff and my work in Congress is an article called "How to Help Your Client Survive Katie Porter." And it's a whole article in Corporate Counsel magazine or something.
Yeah.
About, and of course the article's fittingly behind a paywall, but the whole article is about that Katie Porter might ask your client actual questions. And so what to do. So my staff and I have all often joked that, if God forbid, we're not, we don't get to continue to have the honor of representing the American people, we can always open a business teaching witnesses how to do better in congressional hearings just by answering the question.
Mm-hmm. It seems that, I don't know how that oath goes, but is it similar to what you're taking a court case where you say you're to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Because it seems far from the whole truth when people have even sat before you in the way that you've interrogated them, that it's a little frustrating to the American people, right? To just watch people who are there for a reason, called for a reason, to just be so hidden with the truth. And that feels like it erodes the confidence that we all have. Do you feel like part of your job is to build confidence that the government is functioning, that the government is trustworthy, and that it's going to hold people to some standard? Is that part of what your thought is on how you behave the way you do?
It's absolutely the core part of the job. And it goes back again to what it means to be a representative. The American people, I think, are good people. They want to do good. They have made mistakes. We all have. But we are a country of aspiration. We are a country of people of faith. We are a country of people that strive for ideals that I think are important, of equality and justice, although we often fall short. And so one of the real biggest problems that we face is not a Democratic problem or a Republican problem. It's a problem about people's confidence in government. And I think this is particularly a problem that progressives need to be focused on. If we are saying government can help, government could do this, we should invest in this, then we need to make sure that government is delivering and that we're building up that trust and we're putting in whatever accountability or oversight measures are needed to do that. You know, the most common question I usually get asked is about Democrats and Republicans not getting along. And what are we going to do about the partisan gridlock, or do I have any Republican friends? I get asked a lot of questions like this. I actually think that's the wrong question, in the sense that I think the biggest problem our country faces is that the vast majority of Americans think both Democrats and Republicans are doing a bad job. And I think neither party really wants to talk about that, because it's much easier to say, oh, the American people don't trust Republicans. The American people know that Democrats are going in the wrong direction. Let me be clear. They don't like any of us. We have a problem in connecting and communicating with the American people. And that erosion of trust in Congress is not a Trump effect. It's not recent. It's not a Democratic problem. It's not a Republican problem. It's a long-standing problem that really goes back to how we do our jobs and how we show people what we do. And it manifests itself in all kinds of interesting ways. The fact that most American people believe that when we're in Washington, we're working, and when we're in our districts, we're not. Yeah. Let me tell you, when I'm in my district, I am working. I am meeting with groups. I'm going on a tour of City Hall today. I have 5 meetings with constituent groups after this that are in my district. So, but the fact that they're so quick to think that that's what happens is because we have failed them too often, and they believe that people doing this job are on the take, are in it for the wrong reasons, don't have their best interests at heart. And so a lot of what I try to do is just to try to give people a sense that this job is about doing right by them, that it's not easy, and that I need their help to do this job well. I need them to tell me what they think. I need them to show up and ask questions. And so, one of my other sort of interesting moments, the other day I was in the grocery store and I looked terrible. I was wearing yoga pants and God knows what else. And I just hoped there was no tracker taking pictures, but I was just trying to get some food. And somebody stopped me and said, "You're Katie Porter." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I can't believe you're here." And it's like, I have 3 preteen teen kids. I'm at that grocery store like every other day, dude. How else would I get food? Right. Yes. And like, we're in my kitchen right now, and people often say to me, "Your kitchen is so comforting." It's so like, it's so like typical. And it's like, it's not a prop, people. This is what I have. Like, this is my home. Actual bags of chips stored on top of the refrigerator in the hope that my kids don't eat them all, just like Americans everywhere. And so I think the more that we can break down some of those misunderstandings and take responsibility for them, The fact that the American people don't understand the job of Congress people isn't their fault. It's our job. It's our job to educate them.
So, Katie, when you came into office in 2018, you won the 2018 election, and then came into office in 2019. I think you were the only single mom serving in Congress, which is a remarkable thing. I'm curious how it was different than what you expected. Because we all kind of have these ideas and dreams when you're running for office, and there's the way you think it's going to be, and then I'm curious how it was different than what you expected. And then I'm curious if you can compare the first term to, how things are now, and, maybe how things have shifted since January, both in terms of, the insurrection that happened, which is terrifying, and then also, Democratic control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. So that's a couple of questions there. I'm curious what you think.
Well, to take the first one first, I think one of the things that was most disappointing and kind of frustrating about the job was the fact that a lot of the voting and the kind of formal trappings of Congress take a lot of time and aren't very meaningful. So it takes us an hour to all 400 of us, and anyone who's ever, run a church, any pastor will relate to this. You can't get everybody in their pews, right? So it's like you've got to get everybody assembled, and you have to get the choir to get it, right? And so it takes a lot of time to actually vote. But it isn't actually, there's a lot of sort of milling around, and, the sort of substantive learning that goes on is really more in the hearings and in conversations. The size of the House is a real challenge. It's hard to have a meaningful conversation within the Democratic caucus or the Republican caucus because we're several hundred people. And again, it's not an ideally sized group. So I think the sort of amount of time that DC was not really an opportunity to talk and to learn and to teach, and how much of that I could do in my district. So my second month or third month in office, we decided to have these, alliteration being a social good in itself. We decided to have these events called Coffees with Katie. Okay. And we asked 3 local coffee shops if they could host me, and just said, I'll be there, we'll invite people to come in. And the first one was in the most Republican pocket of the area that I represent. And when we got there, I said to my volunteer, I said, give me my thank you notes. So in case no one shows up, I can write some thank you notes and make this time productive. And we walked in and it was mobbed. I had to stand on a chair to be seen. And so I very quickly realized that so much of the important work of the teaching and the learning occurs here. So I guess I've been a little surprised. I think we spend actually too much time in Washington. And part of that is responsive to people's belief that we only work when we're there. Mm-hmm. And I think we'd actually be better served if we spent more time listening to our constituents, connecting with them, being part of regular life. So, during the pandemic, I went to my grocery store where I shop every day, basically, and gave out thank you cards to essential workers. And even in my own grocery store, going and doing that act of gratitude, I got to talk to some of those workers that I'd seen, and we knew each other, but I got to ask them about their lives and their work and what they needed. And it was really powerful. So I guess that's what surprised me. With regard to the sort of comparison between the 116th, the sort of the year I was elected in 2019, starting then, and now, the administrative state, the executive branch in our country is very powerful. And the difference between this is it really a big object lesson. All we could do in 2019 and 2020 was try to stop Trump from violating the core values of our country and our Constitution.
Yeah.
I don't even think
thank you for doing that, by the way.
Democratic values. I just think it was about core values of equality and justice and humanity and all of those things. And now, we have a president and an administration that is doing a lot, and doing a lot well in terms of vaccines, for example, in terms of trying to rethink and improve some of the core things that we need to be doing in this country. And so I think one of Congress's jobs is to generate a lot of ideas from outside of Washington and to take those to Washington. And that's actually why people always say to me, it must suck to have to run for election every 2 years. Now, I am clearly, despite being kind of an every woman figure in Congress, I clearly am also a big weirdo because I like running every 2 years. It is a gift to get to spend time in conversation with Americans, telling them what I'm working on, asking them what they need, making that connection, engaging them in democracy. That's like the best part of the job, in my opinion. But this makes me a little bit unusual. And so I think one of the things that we have to continue doing in the Biden administration is making sure that as good of people as he's put in Washington, they're still not representative of the American people broadly, right? The number of people who are in Washington who don't have college educations who are in power is virtually zero. The number of people in Washington in power who have different kinds of experiences, who are from rural areas like me or are single parents, it's small. So we still have a lot of work to do in terms of making sure that the administration is hearing and thinking about the real challenges that people are facing in their lives. And I don't think that job changes as much. It's just that I think we have a president now who's listening.
Katie, I have a couple questions about that. There's this narrative, especially among liberals like me, that say things like, look, we don't want just anybody representing us in Congress. We can't just have your average person, right? You can't have Joe Schmo run for president. We need the right kind of leaders. Leadership matters. And this narrative starts to create this very thing you're describing, where people believe that their representatives should be of a different status, a different place than them. And that seems dangerous to me. And look, I mean, we should fess up that you have an advanced degree and we're a college law professor, and like you know your stuff. You're not and one of the people that you're describing needs to be represented. But this feels like a tug and pull in our society between like true people representation. We, the people, send our representatives, and then folks feeling like, I don't want just anybody in Congress because I've heard Mo Brooks and that guy should not be a congressman. Like, he doesn't know what's going on, right? How do you think we deal with this in our society between kind of the people that are qualified to be a candidate and to be a representative and those every average day people, where it doesn't become this version of a political caste system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real problem. And I think it manifests itself in several ways. One is that it takes a lot really of privilege to be able to even run for Congress. And so one of the first bill I had that ever passed the House of Representatives was called the Help America Run Act. And what it would do is allow candidates to use campaign contributions, which we know candidates spend on things, including private air travel, cheese cubes at receptions, all these things, would allow candidates to use campaign funds to pay for the cost of them having health insurance while they are running for Congress, to pay for the cost of child care or senior care while they are running for Congress. This is huge because it then opens up the ability to run to people from different walks of life with different kinds of jobs. And, that is a big, big challenge here. Now, it's not to say that we shouldn't hold our representatives to a high standard of honesty, of thoughtfulness, of the ability to be analytical, to understand complicated problems. But there are people from lots of walks of life who have that skill set.
Yeah.
who historically have been frozen out of politics. And I think when I think about some of the members who I am, really, really impressed with in Congress, people like Lauren Underwood, people like Jason Crow, Colin Allred, he was a football player.
Yeah.
Now he went on to,
He's a pretty good
work at HUD, and he's also a Rhodes Scholar, to be clear. But the point is that the quality that we need are qualities of character and of mind. And we don't live in a country in which everyone with a certain kind of character and a certain kind of mind achieves wealth, because we live in a country with structural inequality and structural racism and structural sexism. And so I think it's certainly reasonable to put your representative to the test, to put your candidate to the test, to ask them to make commitments, to commit, for example, the things that Common Good stands for. But you may find those kinds of people in lots of walks of life.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I just feel like this kingdom or honorable class that we have in politics, it's curious. It's an American fascination with exalting people, whether they're celebrities, movie, music, sports, politics, just so that you can then dismiss them and tear them down, right? It's a thing that we do in our society. We elevate people so that they can be, so we can feel like someone's better than us. That's the aspirational side. And then no one's better than us. And it feels like in politics, a lot of times our representatives, they're not thinking what you're thinking, which is I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm going to talk to ordinary people and I'm going to see what they think. I'm a 54-year-old man who's never met one of my own representatives. I've never been in personal handshake distance to my senators, to my congressperson. I've met lots of other people's because I do this work professionally, but never my own representatives. And that seems odd to me that, and I think this is true when we've traveled around the country supporting candidates, we'll have events and very often people say, this is the first time I've ever been in an event where I could meet a candidate, because they're not part of the political superstructure, right? They don't work campaigns. They're not in the Democratic Party or something. So they're not moving in those circles. Is that a problem, or do we need to just say, look, you represent, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people. There's no way people are going to meet their representatives, or should there be a bigger outcry for people who've never met their representatives and spoken to them or run into them in the grocery store?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a little bit of a tension here. I mean, when I was first elected, the New York Times did an article about me and two other representatives that was called "When You Have 700,000 Constituents and 3 Children." And I actually have a spare 100,000 constituents because my district's a little overpopulated. So it'll get
awesome.
shrunk down in the next redistricting. But it's not necessarily feasible to meet 700,000 people one-on-one, but it is feasible to create those opportunities and then to continue to ask yourself, who isn't coming? Who am I not meeting? Where have I not been? Right? And so I think that's the important question you ought to be asking. And I think, with my staff, we really work hard at this, trying to think about, what voices am I listening to and what voices am I not hearing? And what can we do about that? And, one of the things is not letting donations and money in politics drive who you listen to. So the fact that I don't take corporate PAC money and don't take lobbyist money means if a lobbyist wants to come to see me, you're welcome to, but you've got to have a good idea. If you don't have a good idea, I'm not going to meet with you. If you don't have something to teach me, you can't just come and give me a check. I don't take your money. I want to learn from you. I want to learn about your business, your industry, your perspective, in the same way that I want to learn from a constituent about what they do for a living and what their family needs. So I think that's one way, is the money in politics diverts people's time too often. And I think the class of people that I was elected with, the Democratic class in 2018, a lot of us, we don't take corporate PAC money. We don't take lobbyist money. And it does change, I think, how we do our job. in a really, really powerful way. And then I think the other thing is really to think about, what are the barriers that make it hard for people to engage with politicians and elected officials? And one of them is an intimidation factor. It's that thing that you said about sort of the trapping. I hate all the trappings of Congress. They're just annoying. I mean, they include having to get dressed up, and I'm supposed to wear nice shoes, and I have to wear this pin, and I hate all that. I could do this job really well in a sweatshirt and leggings, like, trust me. Yeah. And so, I think trying to think about where are you creating that distance. So, for example, one of the things I said to my staff is we have to have town halls at different times of day. Yeah. We have to have town halls. Not everybody can meet on a weekend because a lot of Americans work on weekends and work at night. And then trying to find even little things that can connect you to people. So one of the things I do is I write back personally to every child who writes to me. And those we all do constituent correspondence in my office, and it's a lot of work for all of us. And so my staff are constantly being like, this is a kid. And I'm like, he's a 45-year-old college student getting a second degree. Like, take him back. But I get lots of letters from kids. Some of them are scouts who are writing to me. Some of them are kids who are concerned about issues. Sometimes it's class projects. But reading those and writing back, and the fact that I take that time with people who can't yet vote sends a message about, and it sets an example for our office that it's important to hear every voice.
I live in Minnesota, and Paul Wellstone was one of our senators, and he created a whole political movement that's referred to around here as the Wellstone Way. And when I went through candidate training to run for the state legislature, you were trained up. I chose to go through that training to be trained in what was called the Wellstone Way. Are you thinking about anything similar, or is there a movement of other representatives and senators like you who are trying to really not just be an example? Because sometimes by your example, you're showing how other representatives, they're not worried about what day they're going to do their town hall. They don't even do town halls. Like, most don't have any access to their constituents on a regular basis. Are you thinking about there being some kind of a movement afoot, some Wellstone Way like effort to change the perception of who our representatives are at the federal level?
I think it's a good question. I haven't thought about yet doing any kind of how I might formalize this or institutionalize it. But I do think I've done a lot of pushing back at some of the structural things about Congress or about politics that I think stand in the way of this. And I'm not always real popular for it with my own party, even sometimes. So to the, one of the things I've said to leadership is, the Democrats have had the House. We set the calendar. I said, this calendar has me spending 17 to 19 hours a week in transit. That's all time that, except for a couple nice people on the airplane, I can't really do my job. We need to come up with a calendar that reduces the amount of travel and maximizes the amount of time that we have to engage with our constituents and with our colleagues. But that's not how we do it. But maybe how we do it isn't that good. And that's why Congress has about the same popularity as the American cockroach. I mean, it's not high, okay?
Yeah.
And I think we ought to acknowledge that and then think about how we can change it. And so I think that institutional reform, both within politics in terms of things like signing the town hall pledge, making sure that I'm continuing to do it, and then kind of institutionally within Congress, questioning, for example, why can't I use a whiteboard in a hearing? I mean, that was not permitted by the chair of my former committee. And I couldn't use a poster board, and I couldn't play audio, and I couldn't, right? And so why not, right? Why are we not able to help hold people to account using those tools? And so I think, that kind of institutional reformer mindset There are a group of us who were elected in 2018 who I think share that. And I think it's something that binds together across the ideological divide of 2018. So when you think about the most progressive members that people identify, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and then some of the most moderate members, I'll use Alyssa Slotkin here as an example. One of the things they both have in common is they didn't come to Congress to mess around. They came to Congress to try to make the world a better place. And they may differ in what they think top priorities are to do that, but neither of them has any patience for wasted time. And so I think you see in people like Jason Crow, in me, in Andy Kim, there's just a whole host of us, Lauren Underwood, who came from different professions and were saying there is a better way to do this job. Or we think there's a better way, and we need some room to explore that. And I think that institutional reform, it doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think it's one of the most important things that we started to make happen in 2018.
Yeah. Katie, one last question from me. We ask voters to use the common good as their voting criteria. We ask them to, instead of asking the question, who's going to give me the biggest tax cut, or, kind of using selfish things as their voting criteria, we ask voters to use the common good as their voting criteria of like, what's going to make the biggest difference in the most people's lives, and how can we make that happen? I'm curious how that factors into policy, lawmaking, even voting that you do in Congress.
Well, it definitely factors in the idea of a common good into how I talk about a lot of these issues. And I'll give you an example. I've been working a lot recently on childcare, the challenges that people face in going to work during this pandemic, particularly, but even before this pandemic, the challenges that people face in trying to care for seniors, as they age. And one of the things I've been saying is, look, childcare isn't something that we do just for people who have kids. It's not even something we do for the children. One of politicians' favorites, to trot out. Childcare is something we do for everybody. Even if you never want to have kids, and at this point in the pandemic, I couldn't blame you, childcare helps us all. We need a next generation of workers. We need a next generation of community members. We need men and women to be able to participate in the workforce. Because we know, for example, that when women are running companies, those companies make more money and take on less risk. Whew, that is the winning formula in capitalism. So we can't afford to have women exit the boardrooms. We know that women physicians diagnose and treat patients differently than male physicians. We need men and women in the workforce. That benefits everybody. So that means childcare is not something you do to help women or help people who have children. It's something we do to help our economy and help our society. And so that is a huge way that we need to start thinking about these things. And, I think a lot about the book, Our Kids by Robert Putnam, in which he talks about how there used to be this idea when we said, we have to do something for our kids. We meant like the neighborhood doesn't have a playground, or our schools are not any good, or our kids aren't going to be able to compete against, say at the time, the Russians in science and math. But now there's the idea of our kids refers to like our kids around the dinner table. And that is a really impoverished idea of thinking about what our goals are and what our needs are as a society. And so one of the things I try to do, because I think Democrats don't do enough of this, is talk about what capitalism requires.
Nice.
Capitalism is a system that requires each other. Socialism is actually much more atomistic. You can get your goodies from the government. Capitalism means that workers depend on each other. Shareholders depend on workers to create productivity. Management needs workers to work hard. I mean, we are in this together economically, and efforts to present things as otherwise, I think, are really, really dangerous. And I think Democrats need not just to own the idea of the common good in social issues, but to also own the idea of common good in economic issues.
Wow, that's really well said. Okay, can I just ask you one policy-related question? And I know our time's running short here. We're quite worried about what's happening on the border and how border security has become militarized, and border issues are not immigration issues, that they're different categories of response. And we were very bothered by the moral crisis of the way the Trump administration treated those coming to this country and put kids in cages and separated families as an act of cruelty to make America less accommodating. But now in April of 2021, there are still conditions that are not right, and the federal response has been insufficient to deal with this moral crisis. We're going to do a lot of work at Vote Common Good and bring a lot of attention to the life along the border. We're actually going to do a trek from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, on bicycles and walking to be close and along the border. So if you're looking for a long bike ride this fall, keep us in mind. But I'm wondering where you see immigration and border issues currently, and is there going to be congressional hope on the horizon for immigration and for separating out the border issues from immigration issues and demilitarizing our border? Is that going to come from the administration? Is it going to come from a people movement? I know that's a huge question that you could spend hours having to dissect and talk about. But where are you on your hopefulness or the approach that's currently underway around issues of border security and border life?
Yeah. One of the things I try to do with this issue, which deeply divides the district that I represent, this is probably the most contentious issue, or certainly one of them, is to, again, return to that idea of the common good. And so how do we think about creating immigration and border policy that reflect that? And one of the things I think Americans need to understand is we're not the only country dealing with a migration issue. Globally, lots of countries are facing these challenges. The war in Yemen, conditions in Syria, the situation in Myanmar with the Rohingya. I mean, this is a challenging situation. So the fact that we don't have enough facilities for the number of people who are showing up, and the kinds of children, for instance, that are coming alone, who weren't coming alone a generation or two ago in the same numbers. This is a hard situation for government. And so we ought to start by saying this is a real challenge. It's not just about Trump's cruelty. He may have been just about his cruelty, but the Biden administration faces real challenges here. How do you take care of a 10-year-old child who appears in this country alone? Right? That's actually as someone who has a 9-year-old child, it's not so easy to take care of her. And she's mine, and I've had 9 years of practice with her. So these are real challenges. I think one of the things we have to start doing is deciding that as a country, we want to make a commitment to understanding the harms of migration and forced migration. Why are people from Guatemala coming to the United States? They're coming here because the conditions in their country are insufferable, have put them in fear of their lives. And I think we have a role as a global leader to be doing something about that. And one of the things I often educate people in my district about is that we were doing things under President Obama to help clean up corruption and stabilize a lot of these Central American countries so people could live a good life connected to their family, connected to their country, connected to their community. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to want to come to the United States, and we shouldn't welcome them. We should. But we do have to try to stem kind of emergency mass migration, because it's just really hard for any country to deal and absorb in a really hospitable, thoughtful way emergency mass migration that's driven by crises and by violence, by famine, by situations like that. And I think we do have to also kind of separate out. People who say border security is a canard and is being used to oppress and limit our country's obligation humanitarily, they have a fair point. It's also true when you go to the border, and particularly to legal ports of entry, legal border crossings, that they struggle every day to prevent the flow of sex trafficking, of human trafficking, of drug trafficking, of weapons trafficking in both directions. So that is a real challenge, and we need to take it seriously. But we don't need to substitute one for the other. These are two problems. They are both legitimate. So I reject people who say border security is a false thing. Every country has to have borders. It's actually the definition of a nation state, is the idea of citizenship and borders. But you can do it in a way that I think reflects our humanity, our values of justice, our international commitments, and I think this is so important, the good that comes from living those values in terms of immigration. I represent one of the most diverse communities in the United States, and it makes this such a fabulous place. And we have to see that and talk about that constantly, that what makes Orange County an amazing place to live is the fact that we've welcomed people from all over the world here. And so that is a great, immigration, I think, is a great example of where the concept of a common good can be used to help give people a better foundation to start debating the issue, to start understanding the issue, and to break down some of those barriers. So I think that, one of the most valuable things I did as a congressperson was go to the border and spend a day there. And I saw humanitarian groups, I met with Border Patrol, I toured an immigration prison, and they're not detention facilities, they're prisons, and saw exactly what was happening there. And seeing it with my own eyes was really an important part, I think, of feeling grounded in being able to talk about and work on this issue and help people who haven't been there, who are getting fed misinformation. Well, let me tell you what's actually there. Let me tell you what I actually saw, both good and bad, both troubling. That's a great example of why spending all our time in Washington doesn't necessarily arm us with the information that we need to then teach our constituents.
Yeah, last year we had the privilege of being with Representative Veronica Escobar, who led a congressional hearing in El Paso at the border. And it was a really notable thing because Congress doesn't often have hearings anywhere but in D.C. And even that innovation,
they're called field hearings. They're called field hearings.
Be having them all the time.
I'm a fan of them.
Yes.
I think we should have half our hearings be field hearings. I'm a big fan. Generally, I don't think we had any of them, maybe one or two last year on the committee I served on. I think they're incredibly important, in part because they allow witnesses from diverse perspectives to come and participate in the hearing. Once you have to fly to Washington and spend 2 nights and come at the last minute to be heard in Congress, you're limiting who Congress is going to hear from to largely lobbyists, people who work in DC, and people of wealth. And that's a real problem. So I absolutely love field hearings. I'm a super fan of them. The very first congressional hearing I ever testified at was a field hearing at a senior citizen center about credit cards. And one of the things we learned at that hearing was that Congress was busy talking about debit cards, but most seniors didn't think they had a debit card. They called it an ATM card.
Yes.
Right? So we asked them, how many of you have debit cards? And like 10 people raised their hands. And then I said, how many of you have an ATM card? Thinking about what my grandma calls it. And everybody's hand went up. And all of a sudden they realized this whole conversation had been about something that they had in their wallet, not some obtuse, interesting financial product to come. So I want to close by showing you guys that this is my favorite hat. Now, people, if you want to have this cool, most common good hat, I went on today, and this is now a collector's item. I don't think this is still available.
It's not currently available.
Vote Common Good came to Orange County, and I was at this point so burned out from campaigning, and I was pretty jaded. And when Vote Common Good came, it was such an uplifting amazing, funny, joyful, community-centered campaign event. I went to the back of the room and I was like, give me one of everything. And this is, I want to share particularly what I've done with this hat. Now, I don't know if you can see, but this hat has a lot of white stuff on it.
Yep.
I gotta get that thing. Okay. That is surfing wax.
That's salt.
Board wax.
Okay.
It's salt, but it's also board wax from my surfboard. Wow. Because let me tell you, when you're as new to surfing and as bad at it as I am, you want every faith entity on your side. So I'm putting on my common good hat. Jesus, whoever's out there, whatever God you are, I need your help now as I'm about to go out and attempt to get on this surfboard. So I absolutely am proud to be a supporter of common good, but I did not have to dig this out of the back of my closet. I wore it 3 days ago camping.
You're the best.
It is
You're
my
the best.
pleasure to
Thank
be a
you.
common good supporter, and I look forward to getting another hat when you guys come back.
It's on the way. And we are Katie Porter supporters as well and fans. Thank you so much for all your time today. And thanks again for all your good work.
Thank you.
Well, and now here I find myself wearing the new version of that hat, the baseball trucker cap style in blue. If you'd like one of these, head over to votecommongood.com, make a donation in your little note, say, give me a hat. We'll give you a hat. I mean, if you watched all the way this far or listened this long and you want a hat, those of you that are listening on the podcast only, you don't know she put on one of our orange hats, which will be coming back. But if you'd like one of the blues, they're currently available. Well, Rob, once again, Katie, the best. Don't think we can hear you quite yet, Rob, but so it might be a mute issue, but that's okay. We'll bring you back into flow.
Yeah, I had muted myself there, but yeah, one of my favorite things that happened. I think it was at some point. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I got a text from Katie's chief of staff. And it was a picture of Katie on vacation, sitting on a swing, wearing her Vote Common Good hat. And it was just the best. It was just the best. She's the best. I absolutely love her.
Well, very good. Hey, all. Thanks for being a part of our Tuesday Vote Common Good podcast. If you want a little more, just here on Tuesdays, tonight we have a webinar, part 2 of a 4-part series on Christian nationalism, the threat of it. Tonight, Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead, who've written a book called Taking America Back for God, a critique of Christian nationalism, will be our guests, along with Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. Some great input on what we can do to stay people of faith, but not fall into the trap of Christian nationalism. So that's tonight. Then tomorrow, it's our Faith Day, where 4 pastors get together to talk about the common good and when it comes to faith. And then on Thursdays, we bring up important issues that matter in our life in our society. We'll be talking about the police violence and murder that we all have been seeing so frequently in the history of our country. And on Friday, it's Science Day. We'll be joined by astrophysicist Paul Wallace to talk about science for the common good. So a lot going on around here. Head over to votecommongood.com. Sign up for the podcast if you only watch on the video stream. And if you don't watch on the video stream and listen to the podcast, head over to votecommongood.com and you will be able to sign up for this webinar, find the links to our social streams, and watch all this on YouTube. And if you ever make it over to our YouTube channel, click on that like button. It really does do a lot for us. So we're glad to have you aboard and a part of all of this. And Rob, a common good new glasses and bow tie day to you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Talk to you soon.